That check looks fake as hell. Probably printed it at home like all you people do." The words pierced through the bank's quiet, and in that moment, everything shifted for Malik Johnson. Malik stood still, his expression unreadable, yet the words from Tasha Matthews, the teller, echoed in his mind. He had heard them too many times before, in different settings and different forms. This time, though, they stung more sharply than usual. The atmosphere in the branch suddenly felt thick, heavy, and the sharp scent of fresh coffee wafting from the lobby didn't seem so welcoming anymore. He could see Tasha's manicured fingers tapping impatiently on the edge of her counter, her blonde highlights gleaming under the fluorescent lights above. Her eyes barely met his as she shuffled through his documents. The check, a disability compensation payment he had earned with the weight of 3 tours in Afghanistan, was deemed suspicious by her not because of its authenticity, but because of who Malik was. "Excuse me?" Malik's voice, calm and steady, rose above the tense silence that had settled over the bank. His words were a stark contrast to the growing murmur of confusion and disbelief around him. He was always the one to remain composed, no matter the situation, and he had faced worse than this before. Tasha didn't acknowledge his tone. Instead, she dropped the check onto the counter with a small flourish and a dismissive glance at him. "I'm going to need to verify this," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're sure this is yours?" Malik remained silent, his gaze steady. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room on him. Behind him, an elderly Asian woman gasped quietly, clutching her phone like a lifeline, her fingers trembling. A few feet away, the security guard shifted his weight, while other customers subtly craned their necks, watching the interaction with growing curiosity. Malik didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that reacting with anger or frustration would only add fuel to the fire. He had witnessed worse in the heat of battle overseas, and his training had instilled in him a level of emotional control that few could understand. The tearing sound was abrupt, jarring a sharp, violent act in contrast to the otherwise serene atmosphere of the bank. Tasha ripped the check in half with one swift motion, the pieces fluttering onto the counter like discarded paper. Malik's chest tightened, but he didn't react. Instead, he stood taller, unwavering. A small crowd was now gathering, but his focus remained on the woman in front of him, the one who had chosen to dismiss him without a second thought. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Malik said, his voice measured and calm, though a deep, quiet anger simmered beneath his words. The simplicity of the request stood in stark contrast to the absurdity of the situation. He wasn't here to argue, only to have his dignity respected. Tasha rolled her eyes, the faintest trace of a smirk curling at her lips. Sure, she said, as if humoring him, "but it's protocol. I'm doing my job." Behind Malik, Mrs. May Wong, an elderly woman who had been silently observing the situation, pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, and she began recording the incident. It was clear to her that something ugly was unfolding before her eyes. A few other customers subtly began filming as well, their phones raised, capturing every detail. The power of their witness was quiet but potent. As Tasha continued to ignore his request, Malik felt his body remain still, grounded. His military training echoed in his thoughts. Control what you can, stay focused, and don't let them provoke you. He wasn't here to fight. He was here for respect, for the simple dignity that all people should be afforded, regardless of their background or appearance. And then, Devin Harris, the assistant manager, emerged from the back office. He strutted forward, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, the picture of casual authority. The arrogance in his walk told Malik everything he needed to know about how this interaction would unfold. "Hey, what's going on here?" Devin asked, his voice carrying an edge of authority that Malik recognized all too well a kind of superiority based on nothing more than position and perception. Tasha glanced at the torn pieces of the check on the counter, then looked up at Malik. "This gentleman is trying to cash a counterfeit check. I'm just following procedure," she said, her voice hard, as if justifying herself. Devon's gaze flickered from Malik's face to the torn check. He straightened slightly, taking in the scene as if assessing the situation. "Well, sir, we have protocols for suspicious documents," he said, his words dismissive. Malik's gaze remained steady. He could feel the growing heat in the room, the subtle tension that was beginning to charge the air. Yet, there was a certain calm that radiated from him, one that did not falter. He understood that this wasn't just about this moment. This was a systemic issue, and his role in this moment had more significance than just resolving a simple transaction. "You're doing your job, I understand that," Malik said, his voice carrying a weight that neither Tasha nor Devon could ignore. "But I need this resolved. I need to speak to your supervisor. Now." Devon scoffed, the corner of his mouth lifting into a smirk. "We're all doing our jobs here. I get that you're frustrated, but we can't just cash every piece of paper that walks in." The irony was palpable. He didn't see Malik a military veteran, someone who had served his country and earned every bit of his compensation as a person who deserved respect. To him, Malik was just another customer, a label that seemed to fit neatly within his limited worldview. Mrs. Wong, whose hands had been trembling at the beginning of the confrontation, now felt a sense of purpose as she continued her live stream. She had seen enough to know that what was happening here was not just an isolated incident. This was a reflection of something much larger. The live stream quickly gained traction as viewers began to comment and share, creating a ripple effect that would soon become impossible to ignore. Malik glanced down at his watch, an Omega Seamaster, a reminder of the life he had lived and the battles he had fought, both on foreign soil and back home. The time was ticking. "I understand that you think I'm just a customer, but I need this resolved. You can continue with your protocols, but you've misjudged me," Malik said, the calmness in his voice like a steady heartbeat, even as the weight of the situation pressed in on him. Tasha leaned forward slightly, her voice dripping with doubt and disdain. "I've seen this before. People trying to cash fake checks using fake IDs. It's like they think we're stupid or something." "They?" Malik's voice cut through her words, quiet but precise. The implication hung in the air as Tasha's face paled slightly. Her assumptions were clear, but Malik wasn't going to let them go unchallenged. "I'm not making assumptions," she said, the words defensive. "I'm making observations. You walk in here with some suspicious check, and this is what happens." She gestured toward his casual clothes jeans, a plain t-shirt, and work boots, as if they confirmed her beliefs. The words landed heavily in the room, as if they had weight, and for a moment, the entire bank seemed to freeze. The tension was palpable. The line had crossed from personal discomfort to something much deeper. This was a moment of public humiliation, not just for Malik, but for anyone who had ever been dismissed, belittled, or treated as less than. Behind him, the crowd began to grow business people, mothers, elderly patrons, all now caught up in the unfolding drama. Phones came out of pockets and purses, and a dozen cameras began recording. The moment was no longer just about Malik and Tasha. It was about something much larger. "You walk in here looking like you do," Tasha continued, the words barely audible now as Malik's composure began to cast a shadow over her. "Looking like you do with some suspicious check and expect us to just hand over thousands of dollars." Her voice was shrill, her assumptions laid bare. "I don't look like anyone," Malik said quietly. "I look like me." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, Tasha hesitated. And then, As if on cue, Malik's phone buzzed in his jacket. He glanced at it, seeing a brief message. Board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Your call. His thumb hovered over the screen for just a second before he slipped it back into his pocket. I need to speak with your manager now, Malik said once more, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. The time for small talk was over. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Malik's request for the manager was met with a shrug and an air of dismissiveness, but he stood firm, his posture unwavering. The atmosphere in the bank had shifted from quiet professionalism to an undercurrent of unease, as though the air itself held its breath. Devin Harris, the assistant manager, emerged from the back office like a man who believed his mere presence could solve any problem. He strode confidently across the marble floor, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, embodying the image of a man who operated on authority rather than genuine understanding. When he saw the torn pieces of Malik's check scattered on the counter, his expression hardened. "What's the issue here?" he asked, his voice laced with an almost rehearsed indifference. Tasha's gaze flicked from the check to Malik, her attitude clearly unchanged. "This man is attempting to cash a counterfeit check," she said, her words laced with the same suspicion she had initially thrown at him. "I'm just doing my job." She didn't bother to look Malik in the eye, her voice hollow, as if she had already made up her mind about his intentions. Malik's gaze didn't waver. He had long learned the importance of staying composed in moments like these. His military training had taught him that the strength of one's resolve was often more powerful than the most aggressive response. He stood silent, hands resting on the counter, his expression a portrait of dignity. He had been through much worse, but what stung now was the realization that this wasn't just an isolated incident. This was about systemic bias, the kind that hid behind polite gestures and supposed professionalism. Behind him, a soft gasp sounded from Mrs. May Wong, and the faint click of her phone's camera echoed in the otherwise still space. The elderly woman's fingers hovered over the screen, preparing to document the scene as it unfolded. Mrs. Wong had seen enough in her years to recognize injustice when it stood right in front of her, cloaked in the guise of protocol. Devin glanced between Malik and the pieces of the check, his brows furrowing in feigned concern. "Sir," he said, the sarcasm thinly veiled, "we have procedures in place for suspicious documents. This check doesn't pass the test." Malik could feel the sting of the words, but he knew that this wasn't about the check anymore. It was about who he was. The perception of him as a black man, a veteran, dressed casually, had already sealed his fate in their minds. He had faced this kind of discrimination too many times before in stores, in restaurants, and, sadly, even in places where people were supposed to serve and respect him. But today, he wasn't going to let it slide by. "Look," Malik began, his voice smooth but firm, "I understand your protocols. But I also understand that your protocols are based on assumptions about me, my background, and my integrity, and those assumptions are wrong." Devin's eyes narrowed as he tried to maintain control of the situation. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said, his voice carrying a tinge of dismissiveness. "But these checks aren't as simple as you think. There are security features, watermarks, special paper." The mention of security features brought a sense of familiarity for Malik, but not in the way Devin intended. It was a phrase that, in this moment, seemed to reinforce the growing divide between them. Malik had encountered far worse security measures in his years of service overseas: roadside bombs, suspicious vehicles, and more, but here, in the supposed safety of a well-lit bank, he was being questioned about his authenticity, as though it were a game. "I'm not here to discuss security measures," Malik replied, his voice calm, but the edge was there. "I'm here to make a simple transaction. I just want to cash my check." Mrs. Wong's phone buzzed lightly in the background as her stream picked up momentum. Viewers began to chime in, their comments flooding in like an unstoppable wave. She caught Malik's eye for a brief moment and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, her way of saying that she would stand with him. The air felt heavier now, as though something deeper was at play here. The murmurs from the growing crowd of onlookers seemed to swirl around Malik, but he didn't let them distract him. The real fight wasn't just about this moment. It was about exposing what lay beneath the surface, the prejudice, the assumptions, the injustice. "I'd like to speak to the manager now," Malik said again, his voice cutting through the tension. It wasn't a plea, but a demand. Devon seemed to hesitate for just a second, an almost imperceptible shift in his demeanor. His gaze flicked to the growing crowd, and then to the check again, as if he was trying to find something to justify his actions. His hands gripped the counter for a brief moment before he straightened up. "I'll get the manager. But this isn't over," he said, his words edged with the tone of someone who felt they were in control. "Just follow the rules." As Devon turned to leave, Malik's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't just a simple notification. It was a message that spoke louder than anything the bank employees could say. "Board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Your call." Malik's thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before he locked his phone again. His internal resolve remained unbroken. The bank was about to feel the weight of its actions, but Malik knew it would take more than just a phone call to resolve this. The minutes stretched on, and Malik could feel the eyes of the crowd on him. The pressure was mounting, but the knowledge that this moment was bigger than himself steadied him. He wasn't just fighting for his dignity anymore. He was fighting for the countless others who had faced this same prejudice but never had the chance to stand up. Behind him, the door to the back office opened with an air of authority. The manager emerged, her posture perfect, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She walked toward Malik like someone who was prepared to manage a crisis, though she had no idea how large the storm was that she was about to confront. Her name was Angela Torres, and today she would be forced to confront something much more difficult than a simple customer complaint. Angela's sharp eyes took in the scene, her gaze flitting from Malik to the torn check and back again. "What's the situation here?" she asked, her voice smooth but with an undertone of control that seemed to come naturally. Malik met her gaze directly, his expression unwavering. "I'd like to speak to you privately," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The air seemed to grow thicker, and the onlookers fell into a tense silence. The words he had spoken to Devon had been calm, but now, with Angela's arrival, the tension was palpable. As she moved closer, Malik could feel her eyes sweep over him, taking in every detail. Her gaze lingered just a moment longer on his work boots, his faded jeans, his casual t-shirt a subtle judgment, as if his appearance alone could somehow discredit him. In that moment, Malik knew that this wasn't just about the torn check or the simple act of cashing a disability payment. This was about an institution that had decided, long before he had even entered the door, what kind of person he was based entirely on what they thought he looked like. "Let's talk," Angela said, gesturing toward her office, as though leading him into the lion's den. Malik nodded, but as he walked toward her office, he knew this was just the beginning. "If this doesn't get resolved soon, I'll be forced to take further action," Malik says, his voice calm, but the weight of the words sinks in. As Malik steps into Angela Torres's office, the door closing softly behind him, he doesn't take a seat. He stands, facing the manager with a measured intensity. The room, though spacious, feels small in this moment, as if the walls are closing in on the reality of the situation. Angela's office is pristine, the modern furniture meticulously arranged, and the soft hum of the air conditioning provides an almost eerie background noise to the tension between them. Angela Torres had the look of someone who prided herself on professionalism, someone who could diffuse any situation with the right combination of authority and charm. But as she glances at Malik, she can sense that this is no ordinary encounter. The calm demeanor of the man before her doesn't align with the stereotypical image she had painted in her mind. She expected anger, frustration, a man ready to fight, but instead, she's met with an unyielding stillness that seems almost unsettling. Malik, for his part, is perfectly composed. He had already anticipated this moment, not just the confrontation with the bank staff, but the inevitable denial of his dignity. It was a familiar feeling, one he'd experienced countless times in his life. The quiet underestimation, the assumption that he didn't belong, that he wasn't worthy. He had long ago learned to let that slide off him, but today was different. Today, he wasn't going to let it go. "You know," Malik begins, his voice low, but each word clear and deliberate. "I understand you think I'm just some random customer, but I'm not. This situation, it's about more than just this check." He pauses for a moment, letting the words sink in. "I'm here because of something deeper, something that's been happening far too long, and I won't let it slide this time." Angela's eyes narrow slightly, her composure never wavering, but something shifts in her demeanor. She can feel the gravity of Malik's words, though she's not yet sure what to make of them. "I understand you're frustrated," she says, her tone still professional, but there's an edge to it now, as if she's trying to regain control of the conversation. "But these checks, they're not always easy to verify. There are protocols in place for a reason." Malik doesn't flinch. "Protocols," he repeats, his tone almost dismissive. "Protocols that make assumptions about people based on what they look like, what they wear, where they come from. Protocols that don't take into account the full story of who someone is." The silence between them stretches, and Angela suddenly feels the weight of the words she's been avoiding. She hadn't expected this level of resistance. But the truth is, she didn't want to hear it. Not from a man who had dared to challenge her authority. The silence is broken by a soft buzz. Angela's phone vibrates on her desk, but she doesn't reach for it. She knows it's not an important message. Not in this moment. Her attention remains on Malik, who stands still, unfazed, as if this moment of confrontation were just another chapter in a long, hard-fought battle. "You don't get it, do you?" Malik continues, his eyes locking with hers. "This isn't just about the check or some error in protocol. This is about a system that's designed to see people like me as threats before we've even spoken a word." He steps closer to her desk, his calmness now matched with a quiet intensity. "And I'm not going to stand by while people like you continue to hide behind policies that perpetuate this bias." Angela's breath catches for a moment. There's something about Malik's words that cuts deeper than she'd expected. His calmness, his quiet strength, makes her question everything she's known about how to handle situations like this. She's been trained to deal with customer complaints, with difficult clients. But this is different. Malik reaches into his jacket pocket, and for a brief moment, Angela's gaze shifts to his hand, almost instinctively, as if bracing for something. But all Malik pulls out is a small leather portfolio. He places it gently on the desk, the soft thud of it striking the surface, filling the silence. He opens it slowly, and inside, a well-worn military ID, glinting with the weight of medals and honors, catches Angela's eye. Malik flips it over and places it on the desk in front of her, his fingers lingering over the glossy surface of his military ID. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Combat Infantry Badge. The words are a quiet testament to his service, to his sacrifice, to the history that Angela and the bank staff knew nothing about. I've served this country. And you're telling me that my disability check, the one I earned, isn't good enough because of how I look? Angela glances at the ID, her eyes flicking over the names, the rank, the awards, her face growing pale. But she says nothing. She doesn't know how to respond. She has been a part of a system that turned a blind eye to the prejudices that ran rampant in its policies. She doesn't know what to do now. Malik watches her, waiting for the acknowledgement he hasn't yet received. He sees the flicker of realization in her eyes, the understanding that this isn't a simple misunderstanding. It's a flaw in the system, a problem that's much larger than her personal discomfort. I'm not here to make trouble, Malik says, his voice softer now. I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen again to anyone. This bank, this institution, has a responsibility to serve everyone with dignity, but right now you're failing. There's a long pause. Angela shifts uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze flicking between Malik and the check that had been torn in half earlier, now a symbol of the injustice Malik has been subjected to. She's not sure how to fix it, but she knows that something needs to be done. The weight of her position, the weight of the responsibility she holds in her hands is suddenly so much heavier. Malik remains still, his gaze unwavering, and the silence between them stretches on. Finally, Angela picks up the military ID from the desk, her fingers trembling slightly as she examines it more closely. I didn't know, she admits, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. I didn't know who you were, but I should have. Malik nods, his expression softening for the first time. That's the point, he says simply. It shouldn't matter who I am. No one should be judged by how they look or where they come from. We all deserve dignity. Before Angela can respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupts the moment. A junior manager enters, holding a clipboard. The energy in the room shifts once more, but the change isn't lost on Malik. He stands up straighter, knowing that the moment has passed and something larger is about to unfold. The junior manager, unaware of the tension that's just passed, looks at Malik with a smile that falters when he notices the scene in the room. Angela shoots him a look, and he immediately steps back, sensing the gravity of the situation. Malik looks at the manager, then back at Angela, knowing that this conversation is far from over. The next steps are coming, and they'll be watched by far more eyes than just the ones in this room. Malik's face appeared on screens across the country, but the real story was just beginning. The live stream had gone viral. Mrs. May Wong, who had first taken out her phone to record the injustice, had become the unintentional catalyst for a movement. As she shared the footage, it spread like wildfire, leaving a trail of shocked viewers, furious comments, and a public demand for justice. People from all walks of life, from the young college student to the elderly veterans, watched as the humiliation of one man in a bank turned into a national conversation. Malik's calmness, his measured words, and the weight of his identity as a decorated veteran who had served this country had struck a chord. But even as the video continued to gain traction, Malik knew that this moment would only mean something if it led to real change. It wasn't enough to simply expose the discrimination. It had to be confronted head-on, and systems had to be held accountable. He had already stood up for himself, but now he was ready to ensure that the institution itself faced the consequences of its actions. The following morning, Union Financial Services was in crisis mode. The bank's corporate offices, housed in a sleek building with large windows that overlooked the city's skyline, buzzed with activity. Employees in suits walked briskly through the hallways, trying to maintain a semblance of business as usual, but the air was thick with tension. The story had made the front pages of newspapers, and every major news outlet was covering the incident. The hashtag #Unashof banking bias was trending worldwide. Malik sat in his living room, a cup of coffee resting in his hands, as he watched the news coverage. It was surreal to see his own face on the television screen, his words quoted in bold letters across the bottom of the screen. But as the reporters analyzed the incident and discussed the bank's next steps, Malik's thoughts remained focused on one thing. What would come next? What would he do now that the world was watching? His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. The screen displayed the name of Patricia Wong, the regional director at Union Financial Services. Malik had met Patricia briefly during his tenure as a board member, but today she was calling him for a different reason. "Malik," Patricia's voice was calm, but there was an edge of urgency. "We need to talk. This situation can't be ignored. Corporate's already on damage control. We need you to help guide us through this." Malik took a breath, steadying himself. He had anticipated this moment. "I'm listening." "I've been authorized to make some immediate changes," Patricia continued. "But I need your input. You've got a perspective that no one else here can offer. I need you to tell me what we can do right now to start fixing this, to show the public we're serious about accountability." Malik sat up straighter, his mind shifting into action. He had been through the chaos of combat, the uncertainty of war. But this was something different. This was a fight for the future of corporate America, and he wasn't going to let it pass him by. "I'm not interested in damage control, Patricia," Malik said, his voice firm. "I want systemic change. I want to ensure this never happens again. If you're serious about fixing this, we need to take real steps, not just fire people and make empty promises." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Malik could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind, considering his words. Finally, she spoke again. "What do you propose?" Malik didn't hesitate. "First, we need a full investigation into the culture at Union Financial Services. We need to examine how policies are enforced, especially when it comes to racial profiling. Second, we need to establish a clear, transparent system for reporting discrimination, and it has to be visible to the public. People need to know that if they speak up, something will happen. And third, we need to implement mandatory bias training for every employee, no exceptions." Patricia's voice softened, the sincerity evident. "I'm with you, Malik. I'll make sure the board hears this, but I need you to help us sell it. This is going to take more than just policy changes. It's going to take leadership that people can believe in." Malik looked out the window, his gaze far away, the city streets below moving in their usual rush. But for Malik, the city felt different now. This wasn't just a fight for his dignity anymore. It was a fight for everyone who had ever been treated like less. "I'll do what it takes," Malik said quietly. "But it's not about me. It's about the people who don't have a voice, the ones who've been ignored for far too long. We have to do more than just apologize. We have to act." By the time Malik hung up, the gears of corporate bureaucracy were already set into motion. He had been asked to take the lead on this, to guide Union Financial Services through the turbulent waters of public backlash. But the truth was, he was already committed. This wasn't just a corporate issue anymore, it was a matter of justice, and Malik wasn't about to let this moment pass without ensuring change would follow. The call to action wasn't just for the board. It was for everyone who had ever been affected by discrimination, by bias, by systems that valued certain people over others. Malik knew that if this fight was going to mean something, it had to be more than just a gesture. It had to be a movement. Later that day, Malik sat in a boardroom with Patricia Wong and several senior executives from Union Financial Services. The tension in the room was palpable. Even the air conditioning seemed to hum louder than usual, as if it were holding its breath. Patricia introduced Malik as the person who would be leading the charge for reform, and as his name was spoken, a few of the executives glanced up at him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Malik could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he wasn't here to make friends. He was here to make sure things changed. The meeting began with a series of apologies. Corporate speak flowed freely as the executives recited their scripted responses, offering lip service to the notion of systemic change. But Malik wasn't interested in empty words. He wanted action. "I don't need to hear apologies," Malik said, his voice calm but cutting through the rhetoric. "I need to see plans. I need to know what you're going to do to ensure that this never happens again." Patricia nodded, signaling for the meeting to shift. She opened a folder in front of her and began to outline the steps they were prepared to take. Malik listened carefully, noting every detail, every plan. But he also knew that there was more to be done. This wasn't just about policies. It was about changing the culture of the entire organization. As the meeting progressed, Malik pushed for accountability. He questioned the vague promises of diversity and inclusion, demanding concrete actions and measurable outcomes. He wasn't afraid to ask the hard questions, and he wasn't afraid to hold the company's feet to the fire. The executives were uncomfortable, but Malik could see that some of them were beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. They had thought this was just about a bad day at one branch, but Malik had made it clear that this was about the future of the entire institution. By the time the meeting ended, Malik had secured commitments for bias training, the establishment of an independent review board, and the creation of a transparent reporting system. The changes wouldn't happen overnight, but they were a start, a foundation for what Malik knew would be a long and difficult journey. As Malik walked out of the boardroom, his mind raced with the next steps. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, he felt like he had made a dent. The work ahead would require more than just corporate reforms. It would require people to listen, to acknowledge their biases, and to confront them head-on. It was no longer just a story about one bank. It was a story about all the people who'd been treated unfairly and dismissed. Malik sat in his apartment the morning after the press conference, the weight of the previous day settling heavily in his bones. The phone rang constantly, the screen lighting up with notifications, messages from reporters, activists, and even people he didn't know. Social media was abuzz, but as the messages flooded in, Malik couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. The world was finally listening. The incident in the bank, one that had begun as a personal moment of injustice, had quickly snowballed into a public reckoning. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was a fight for anyone who had been dismissed or overlooked. The viral video, the hashtag #JagaForBankingBias, the public outcry, it had all transformed into something much larger than what he had anticipated. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from Patricia Wong. "Malik, we're organizing a press conference this afternoon. We need to address the changes we're implementing and the steps forward. It's time to show people we're serious about reform." Malik stared at the message, his thoughts running through the logistics of what was about to unfold. He had known this moment would come: the public scrutiny, the wave of reporters and cameras, the questions he would have to answer. But now, as the day approached, he understood the gravity of it all. This was more than just a moment of personal redemption. This was about making sure that real change could come from a system that had long been broken. He dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple suit that gave him the appearance of quiet authority. He didn't need to stand out. He didn't need to be flashy. Today was about the message, not the man. And the message was clear: accountability, transparency, and the dignity of every person who walked through those doors. The press conference was held at Union Financial Services headquarters, an imposing glass building that loomed over the streets of downtown Atlanta. The air was thick with anticipation, and a small crowd had gathered outside, their phones raised in unison, capturing every moment. Inside, the room was filled with reporters, their cameras flashing and microphones held high. Malik could feel the weight of their gazes, the pressure to get this right. Patricia stood next to him, her usual composed demeanor now edged with a hint of nervousness. The executives from the bank were seated at the front, waiting for Malik to speak. But this moment wasn't for them. This was for the people watching at home, for everyone who had been overlooked or judged simply because of who they were. The moderator, a reporter Malik had seen on television before, stood up and cleared her throat. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice calm and professional. "We're here today with Malik Johnson, a board member of Union Financial Services, who has been leading the charge for accountability and reform after an incident involving racial profiling at one of the bank's branches. We'll begin with a few questions." Malik stood tall, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the faces of the reporters. This was his moment to speak not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed because of their race, their background, or their appearance. He had already fought this battle once, but now it was about more than just confronting individuals. It was about confronting the system itself. The first question came quickly, cutting through the tension. "Malik, can you explain to us what changes Union Financial Services is going to make in the wake of the viral incident?" Malik didn't flinch. He had prepared for this. "We're implementing immediate changes," he said, his voice steady. "We're conducting a full investigation into the incident, but we're also looking at the broader picture. It's not just about what happened that day, it's about the culture that allowed it to happen. We're introducing new protocols to ensure that no customer is treated like that again. We're creating a transparent system for reporting discrimination, and we're launching mandatory bias training for all employees, starting immediately." The reporters scribbled in their notebooks, and the camera lights flashed brightly as they absorbed his words. But Malik knew that talk was cheap. This would mean nothing if the actions didn't follow through. Another reporter raised her hand. "Malik, some people are saying that this is just a PR move, that Union Financial Services is only making these changes because the public backlash has become too much to ignore. What do you say to that?" Malik took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I say that real change doesn't happen in the absence of pressure. Yes, the public response has been loud, and it should be, but that doesn't make it any less real. We're not doing this to save face. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. This isn't just about protecting the bank's reputation. It's about ensuring that every person who walks into this institution, no matter who they are, is treated with respect." Patricia stood beside him, her eyes scanning the room. She could feel the shift in the energy, a subtle but powerful change. This wasn't just a speech. This was a declaration. The questions continued, one after another, each reporter trying to probe deeper, to find cracks in Malik's resolve. But he didn't waver. His answers were measured, firm, and consistent. This wasn't about spinning a story or trying to win approval. It was about creating a legacy of change that would last long after the press conference ended. Malik had expected some pushback. But the questions were becoming more pointed, less about the future of Union Financial Services and more about Malik himself. One reporter, a young woman with piercing eyes, raised her hand. "Malik, how does it feel to be the face of this movement? To represent those who've been mistreated by this system?" The question caught Malik off guard, but only for a moment. He had always understood the importance of his position, but this was the first time he felt the full weight of the responsibility. He wasn't just a man trying to get his check cashed. He was now the embodiment of every person who had ever been underestimated. "It's not about me," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "It's about everyone who's been told they don't belong. It's about every person who's been pushed aside because they didn't fit the image of who the system thinks they should be. This is for them, not me." There was a brief silence in the room. The reporters looked at each other, their pens still poised in the air. Malik's words hung in the air like a challenge, not just to the people in the room, but to everyone who had ever turned a blind eye to injustice. Then, out of nowhere, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. Devin Harris, the assistant manager from the bank, stepped into the room, his posture stiff and uncertain. His eyes met Malik's for a moment, and the tension between them was palpable. The cameras captured the brief exchange, the significance of it not lost on anyone in the room. Malik could feel the collective breath of the room held in anticipation. This was the moment he had known would come, the moment when the institution had to face the consequences of its actions. And now, Devin Harris, the man who had treated him like a criminal, was standing there, a symbol of the very system Malik was fighting against. Malik's gaze never wavered as Devin stood there, a man caught between his actions and the reality of the moment. The day after the press conference, the phone calls kept coming, and Malik knew the real work was just beginning. As Malik stepped out of the elevator into the bustling lobby of Union Financial Services headquarters, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The sleek, glass-walled building, which once stood as a symbol of corporate success, now felt like the front lines of a battle for the soul of the company. The doors opened with a soft swoosh, and Malik walked in, his suit neatly pressed, his demeanor unchanged. He had always been a man of purpose, but now, that purpose was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The media frenzy had reached a new peak. His name was everywhere, from news reports to social media feeds. The hashtag #ShotYourBankingBias continued to trend, and the comments, both supportive and critical, flooded his phone. The nation was watching, waiting for what would come next. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when so many had put their faith in him. "Mr. Johnson," a voice called from across the lobby. Malik turned to see Patricia Wong, the regional director who had quickly become his ally in this mission. She was dressed in a sharp black suit, her face tight with the pressure of the situation, but there was an unmistakable determination in her eyes. She waved him over, and as he approached, she offered him a brief but encouraging smile. "We've been making calls all morning," Patricia said, her voice steady but with the undercurrent of urgency. "The board's behind you. We've already started drafting the new protocols. The bias training will be implemented next month, and the complaint system goes live in a week. But we need to make this visible. We need the public to see that we're committed to change." Malik nodded, but inside, his mind was racing. "And what about the rest of the company?" he asked. "The employees who were complicit in this? What are we doing to hold them accountable?" Patricia's face tightened. She had been the one to oversee the crisis management and damage control, but the real work was about to begin. "Devin and Tasha have been suspended for now," she said, her voice low. "Angela's been reassigned to a regional office, but we need to do more. We need to show the world that this isn't just about those individuals, it's about changing the entire culture of this place. If we're going to move forward, we have to be transparent, and we need everyone on board." Malik's gaze drifted to the large glass windows, which offered a view of the city's skyline, as though he were looking beyond the immediate issue. It wasn't just Union Financial Services that needed to change. It was the entire financial sector. The corporate world had built its foundation on assumptions, on the idea that certain people were less deserving of respect. That mindset had to be eradicated, not just with this bank, but with every institution that perpetuated these biases. "Start with the branches," Malik said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "I want every employee to be held accountable for how they treat customers. The problem isn't just with a few bad apples. It's embedded in the entire system." Patricia nodded. "I'll make sure the action plan is pushed through. It's going to be a lot of work, but we're committed. But we need you, Malik. Your voice has been the one leading this charge. The board members want to see a clear path forward." Malik didn't respond immediately. He had thought long and hard about what needed to happen next, and he knew the work would require more than just corporate reforms. This was about shifting a culture that had long valued power over people, appearance over merit. "I'm not doing this alone," Malik finally said, his voice firm. "This can't just be my responsibility. The public has a part to play in holding these systems accountable. The workers, the customers, the people who've been affected, they need to see this change, and they need to feel like they have a voice. This isn't just a matter of policy. This is about dismantling years of prejudice." Patricia looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "What do you suggest?" "We launch an outreach program," Malik said, his ideas forming as he spoke. "We partner with civil rights organizations, like the NAACP, to help monitor the changes we're making. We give employees a platform to speak out, anonymously if needed. We create a space where people can be honest, where they don't feel afraid to report bias or mistreatment. Transparency isn't just about what we do, it's about how we involve the people who have been wronged." Patricia considered his words for a moment, then nodded. "I think that's a good idea. Let me start setting things up." But Malik wasn't finished. He had one more thing on his mind. "We need to make sure the media doesn't control the narrative," Malik said, his tone sharp. "We need to show that this isn't just about headlines. This is about real people, real lives. I want to go public with the results of the investigation. I want the world to see how systemic the problem is." Patricia seemed to hesitate, but only for a moment. "That's risky," she warned. "We don't know what will come out of it." "I'm not afraid of the truth," Malik said quietly, his resolve unwavering. "The truth is what sets us free. If we want real change, we have to confront the ugly parts of this system. And that means showing everyone exactly what we've done to perpetuate these biases." Patricia paused, looking at him for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "You're right. I'll set up a press release and a full statement from the board. This is a new era for Union Financial Services." Malik nodded, but he wasn't done. He knew that even with all the changes happening at Union Financial Services, the real fight was still ahead. Later that afternoon, as the press release went live, the media coverage took on a new tone. What had once been a story of personal humiliation was now framed as a broader narrative about corporate accountability, social justice, and systemic bias. The world was paying attention, and Malik knew it was just the beginning. As the evening news aired, Malik sat back in his chair, reflecting on the days that had led him to this moment. He had fought for his dignity, but the fight for real change had only just begun. And then, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He rose to answer it, wondering what new challenge awaited him. The journey Malik Johnson undertook was one that many of us know all too well, even if we don't always have the words to describe it. It began with an injustice as old as time itself, a quiet act of prejudice hidden behind polite smiles and well-worn policies. A simple act, the attempt to cash a check, became the battleground for something much larger than a financial transaction. In that moment, Malik wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every person who had ever been dismissed because of their appearance, their background, or their race. He was confronting a system that had long deemed certain people less deserving of respect. His check, earned through years of service and sacrifice, had been torn in half by someone who could not see past his face, past his clothes, past his history. But Malik wasn't like the people who had come before him. He wasn't the angry man ready to fight with words or fists. Instead, he stood in the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. His calmness, his unwavering dignity in the face of humiliation, was the weapon that would bring this system to its knees. He understood that there were far greater battles to fight than the one playing out in that moment, yet he chose to engage, not with hate, but with an ironclad resolve that spoke louder than any words could. As the story unfolded, it wasn't just about a man confronting an individual who had wronged him. It was about a man challenging an entire system of bias. Malik's journey was one of courage and resilience. Yes, but it was also a journey of transformation. Through his quiet resistance, he exposed a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. Policies that claimed to be neutral were too often built on assumptions that were anything but. Those who thought they could hide behind corporate shields, behind rules and regulations that dehumanized people like Malik, were now forced to reckon with their own complicity. The real test of Malik's strength wasn't in his ability to stand tall when confronted. It was in his willingness to forgive, to look at those who had wronged him, and see them not as enemies, but as human beings who had made choices within a system that needed to change. That change didn't come from anger or retaliation. It came from a commitment to something greater than personal revenge. It came from Malik's ability to see beyond the individual and recognize that the system itself and the people in it needed to evolve. Through the media coverage, through the wave of public opinion that followed, and through the courage of those who stood by him, Malik began to see the true power of allyship. Sokum Mei Wong, the elderly woman who had taken out her phone and simply pressed record, became an unlikely hero in this story. Her quiet act of rebellion against the status quo had sparked a national conversation. The viewers who shared her stream, the people who commented with their own stories of injustice, had shown Malik that he was not alone. This wasn't just one man against the system. It was a collective voice, rising together to demand respect, to demand change. In the end, Union Financial Services was forced to confront its own failures, its own deeply ingrained prejudices. But the journey didn't end with corporate reform. It was only the beginning of a larger conversation, one that would extend beyond the walls of the bank and ripple through the very fabric of society. It was a conversation about dignity, about human worth, and about the importance of seeing one another not through the lens of race or class, but as equals. As Malik took the steps toward real change, he knew the fight wasn't over. There would be more battles, more setbacks, but this was the moment that mattered. The moment when he stood up, not for revenge, but for justice, for the countless people who had been overlooked, for the families who had been told they didn't belong. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. And in the quiet of his thoughts, Malik knew the ultimate truth. This was not the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. Change didn't come from policies. It came from the heart, from the courage to confront the ugly truths and demand better for everyone. Malik's fight had been long and hard, but it had shown the world that one voice, one act of courage could start a wave of transformation. He had shown that when you fight with dignity, when you fight with quiet strength, there is nothing that can stand in your way. This is a story that echoes through the ages, a story of resilience, dignity, and the unshakable belief that we all deserve respect. It's a reminder that true power isn't about domination. It's about lifting others up, standing firm in the face of adversity, and pushing for change, no matter the cost. And so, as Malik walked away from the battle that had shaped him, he knew that the journey wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to all of us, to every person who had ever faced the sting of prejudice, the weight of judgment, or the pain of being silenced. Because the truth is, in the fight for dignity, every story matters, and every voice has the power to change the world. Philosophy remains. True change starts with the courage to confront the uncomfortable truths and demand better for everyone. If you believe in fighting for justice, for dignity, for equality, leave a comment with the number 1. Subscribe to our channel to hear the next story, where we continue to explore the quiet power of resilience and how together we can make a difference.